Aperture. The third basic characteristic of a lens is its aperture or iris setting. To better control the amount of light that strikes the surface of the tubes or chips, an iris or variable opening is built into the lens. A numbering system was developed in the early days of photography and remains in use today, not only in photography but also in cinematography and videography. The carefully calibrated sizes of the opening in the aperture are labeled with numbers called f-stops. Although the numbering system may seem strange, each full f-stop doubles if opening or halves if closing the amount of light allowed to pass through the lens. The f-stop number is the ratio of the focal length to the diameter of the aperture opening. The common full f-stops used in videography are f1.4, f2, f2.8, f4, f5.6, f8, f11, f16 and f22. The term stop down means to close the aperture or increase the f-stop number. To open up means to increase the size of the aperture opening, thus decreasing the f-stop number. An easy way to remember the change is to think of f-stops as fractions. 1 by 22 is smaller than 1 by 1.4. When a camera operator alters the aperture of the lens, two things happen simultaneously. The aperture changes the brightness of the lens image falling onto the chip, altering the picture's exposure. The aperture modifies the depth of field, affecting the sharpness of anything nearer and further than the actual focus distance. We have three options when selecting the lens aperture. Choose an f-stop to suit the exposure. Adjust the lens aperture to give a properly exposed picture so that you can see tonal gradation and details clearly in the subject. If there is insufficient light, you may need to add additional lighting. If there is too much light so that the shot is overexposed, the lighting on the subject may need to be reduced. Reduce the lens aperture, stop down, or add a neutral density filter. Choose an f-stop that gives a specific depth of field. People usually concentrate on getting the exposure right and accept whatever depth of field results. However, there will be times, especially in close-up shots, when it is not possible to get the entire subject in sharp focus. In other words, there is insufficient depth of field. Then it is necessary to reduce the aperture and increase the amount of light going into the camera until the exposure is right. Settle on an f-stop that averages the lighting situation. There may be times when the camera operator has little or no control over the amount of light on the scene or when the camera needs to move around under varying light conditions. In these situations, there may be little choice but to adjust the lens aperture manually for the best average exposure or to switch on the camera's automatic iris control and accept whatever depth of field results. Depth of field. Each of the previous characteristics of the lens, focal length, focus range and aperture, f-stops, is a tool to use in controlling the image desired by the videographer. Focal length affects how many subjects, how much of the subject and the size of the subject in the frame. It also alters the appearance of subjects by distorting their size. See earlier discussion. Focus directs the attention of the viewer by placing important subjects in focus and less important subjects out of focus. Changing the focus called rolling or pulling focus, can also guide the attention of the viewer from one subject to another. The f-stops must be set within the technical limitations of the camera and source of light so that there is enough light for the chips to create an image and not too much light that chips are overpowered. Changing the f-stop can alter the mood and apparent time of day. Slight underexposure can give the appearance of evening, early morning or even night time, or suggest a gloomy, dramatic mood. Slight overexposure can give the impression of bright daytime or lend a comic, light-hearted feeling. A fourth characteristic of lenses, depth of field, in short DOF, is dependent on the three characteristics described previously. Depth of field is the distance from the camera that subjects appear in acceptable focus. This distance depends on the focal length of the lens, its focus setting and the aperture opening. The longer the focal length, the closer the focus point, the wider the aperture setting, the shallower the depth of field. The converse is also true. Depth of field is critical when trying to focus on close-ups or on rapidly moving subjects, such as in sports and when light levels are limited. Depth of field also may be used creatively to exclude from subjects by placing them out of focus but within the frame. The depth of field varies with the following factors: the distance at which the lens is focused, the size of the image sensors, the focal length of the lens, the lens f-stop, aperture. What is exposure? Every video camera requires a certain amount of light to function effectively and produce quality images. However, the chips can only handle a limited range of tones. When shots contain a wide range of tones, brightness values, directors cannot hope to reproduce them all absolutely accurately in the final image. If the amount of light from a surface exceeds the chip's upper limit, it will reproduce as white in the video picture. It will burn out or clip to a blank white. Conversely, when a surface reflects too little light, it will fall beyond the system's lower limit and crush to an overall black tone. The average brightness of the lens image falling onto the chip is primarily determined by the lens aperture, f-stop. The goal is to adjust the aperture so that the most important tones, usually people's faces, are clearly visible. This process is called adjusting the exposure. Correct exposure is a subjective choice. No one can judge whether a film shot is going to turn out right until it has been processed, developed and printed. So, it is extremely important for the filmmaker to calculate the correct exposure before shooting. Otherwise, entire sequences could be wildly wrong. White balance. Some people mistakenly think all you need to do is find a scrap of white paper or card, put the card in front of the camera and press the button marked white balance. Well, there is more to it than that. If you want to have complete control over the video, you should. What is white balance? White balance is a camera control that adjusts the camera's color sensitivity to match the prevailing color of outdoor light, cooler, indoor light, warmer, or fluorescent light, greener. On most cameras, white balance may be set either automatically or manually. On professional cameras, white balance can be set to match exactly the light source you are shooting with. Auto white balance. Many cameras allow completely automated white balance. Many of us are fooled into thinking that we don't have to worry about whether shooting indoors or out. The camera makes the color decisions for you when this setting is engaged. While auto white balance is convenient, it's also prone to color shifts, especially under mixed light sources. For best results, professionals always perform a manual white balance anytime lighting conditions change. Manual white balance. Manual white balance is a setting that allows camera operators to match the exact lighting used. It is the professional way to shoot and is very easy to accomplish. The operator generally shoots a white card and presses a white balance button that adjusts the red, green and blue CCD signals so that the white card appears white and exhibits no color cast. This procedure, of course, must be performed every time you encounter different lighting conditions. All professional cameras allow you to set a white balance manually.